Hey, welcome to Cafe Maddy. Happy New Year. I know it's January, but I still got my Christmas tree up back there. I guess I'm lazy, but I'm not sure when I'm gonna take that down. Maybe probably next week. But here we are. So many months later with a new episode. I just want to thank everyone who have enjoyed all the past episodes and were patiently waiting for a new one. I saw each and every one of your comments. The ones about my podcast really stood out because it was a project that was near and dear to my heart. And since I stopped, basically I was taking a break and searching for a story to tell. And a lot happened the past 6 months. I traveled, I dated, I got to go to Korea and Japan and see my family. And after so many months, finally I felt like writing. And this one's called The Beauty in Our Limit. So tell me, do you guys have a quote or a line from a book that you carried for many, many years? I feel like I've talked about this before, but there was a short novel that I read when I was 20 years old. It was called Tokyo Fiancé by Emily Nothomb. And I picked up the book after reading an excerpt of it in my lit class in college. And in that book, I read a line that I carried in my heart for the rest of my 20s. In the book, the main character, Emily, probably an autobiographical figure for the author, whose name is also Emily. She spends a tumultuous few years in Tokyo, Japan, and then decides to leave her lover behind and ends up returning to Belgium. And in her last few thoughts on her flight back home, she writes, "I am 23 years old and I've yet to find any of the things that I'm looking for. And that is why I like life. It is a good thing at the age of 23 not yet to have found your way. That is why I like life. It's a good thing at the age of 23 not yet to have found your way." I was 20 at the time, but I could see this ringing true for many, many years, perhaps the rest of my life. I carried this quote with me and I left the age part blank for every year. And it indeed resonated with me when I turned 23 in a total mess. And also at 27 when I felt like I had stumbled yet again instead of making strides forward in life. And this quote and perspective alone, in those moments of feeling lost, it gave me a lot of hope. It also allowed me to appreciate my life as a lost person who was alive, kicking and fighting through. If you've heard my other episodes, you already know this is sort of my life perspective. And I thought that the rest of my life, I'll keep liking life. Because at the age of 35, 40, 50, 60, I will continue to find myself getting to know life, searching for whatever it is that I'm looking for. But lo and behold, 10 years later, isn't it funny that time to time, what you believe so strongly starts to fade a little bit? Or maybe not fade, but it starts to shift and change. And this is where I am at the very last end of my 20s. I turn 30 next week. I don't uphold this perspective as much anymore, although I am so glad I did while I did. They say that truth is timeless and perspective should be based on truth, right? But I think in some ways, the truth we look to at different stages of life can be different, and that's okay. Aren't we all trying to find the truth? So sometimes we're wrong, and that's okay. In your 20s, it is better to believe that life is totally boundless and limitless. This sort of blind faith allowed me to be acquainted with life in beautiful ways, but this is what changed. I really believe that the privilege of getting older is getting acquainted with life more. Early 20s, it's so hard because we're stepping into the unknown. We've never been adults before. It was our first heartbreak, first betrayal maybe, first drama of that magnitude, first job, and because we don't have a reference point of what it's like after everything is said and done, that's the scariest and most exciting part. And as we go through one life event after the other, there is one consistent thing we learn, that despite everything, with time, we're okay. And from this knowledge comes strength. It gives us strength the second time we go through a new low, to know that at the end of it, there is a future us healed and doing well. And I think that's getting acquainted with life and building the tools to live through the rest of our lives. And as I got to know the beginning and sort of the middle of life, lately I've been getting to know the end. I'm seeing maybe glimpses of loss that is close to death. That got really dark or suddenly a little grim. But, I don't see a lot of content out there talking about death. And I know it's kind of a grim, morbid, and heavy and infinitely deep subject. But I want to talk about it as someone who is only starting to see glimpses of it as a 29-year-old. Let me tell you what I had to face this past year. It made me realize that life is no longer so timeless or limitless as it was to me before. And this truth, I think, came in good timing. It's pushing me to condense my life with meaning and to savor the limited time I have here on earth. So recently, I finally finished another novel that I've been on and off reading for years. It's called Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. Honestly, I didn't love it, and maybe that's why it took so long to finish it. But there was a line I read in the last few chapters that summed up my 2022. And it kind of allowed me to start a new chapter inside me. It said, lost opportunities, lost possibilities, feeling we can never get back again. That's part of what it means to be alive. But inside our heads, at least that's where I imagine it, there's a little room where we store those memories. A room like the stacks in this library. And to understand the workings of our own heart, we have to keep on making new reference cards. We have to dust things off every once in a while. Let in fresh air, change the water in the flower vases. So I don't know about the rest of the book, but when I read these lines, it really, really just rang true for me. Things we can never get back again. That is part of what it means to be alive. And to understand the workings of our own hearts, I have to keep making new reference cards. I have to keep writing, creating new videos, new art. I lived my 20s exploring as if I had an infinite stretch of time and space. In my 30s and onwards, I'll continue to explore life, but with death in mind. So I mentioned I got to go to Korea and Japan this year. And because of the pandemic, it had been over 2 years since I went back to see my grandparents. And on this trip, we found out that my grandma on my mom's side, she didn't remember us anymore. In Korean, we say 가슴이 무너지다. It means the heart collapses from grief. I felt like I lost her along with a part of my world, and so much more so for my mom. In 2014, I also visited Korea. 2014, so that's 8 years ago. Back then, my grandma was healthy, mentally and physically, and I got to take her out on a date with me. We went to the Korean royal castle in the middle of the city where we walked around. It was summer, it was beautiful. We took photos and I bought her lunch. Near that palace, there was a 보쌈 restaurant, so we ate 보쌈 for lunch. Do you know what 보쌈 is? 보쌈 is a pork shoulder or belly slow cooked with aromatics like scallion, garlic, peppers, onions, and the fermented soybean paste in water so that the pork grease from the pork belly is rendered and the meat is lean and tender. It's sliced into pieces and then eaten in a sam. Sam means a lettuce wrap with seasoning and rice. So you pick up a piece of the lettuce, add a bit of rice, a slice of pork, 새우젓 or the Korean fermented tiny shrimp. So you put that 새우젓 on top. It's really salty and savory. And you put a little bit of 쌈장, a soybean paste flavored with gochujang and garlic. And you wrap it up and eat it with one bite. So the textures and flavors mix and explode in your mouth. My grandma and I ate everything on the table that day, and I remember her really enjoying it. And that was the last day I saw her in 2014. When we said goodbye, I was too young and naive to understand why she was getting all teary-eyed, doubting whether she would see me again. I said, "Don't be ridiculous, don't cry. There are many, many years ahead of us, and I'm gonna be back soon." That's what I told her. And I felt like I was right. Because in 2019, I went back, and that's when my grandma had just checked into a senior living / care center. And she had some issues walking, and her knees were weak, but her mind was sharp. She was still funny, social, active. And I visited her, and I took her out on a walk by the river. We went to a coffee shop, we drank some tea. And I also brought her to eat samgyetang. This hearty soup made with whole chicken and stuffed ginseng. It's a delicacy for the summer in Korea. And while we were apart during the pandemic, we heard bits of news about her, and then we started to hear about her dementia, which this year it was all too real and heartbreaking in person. Our time is limited here on Earth with our loved ones, in the city or town we love, in the destinations waiting to be discovered, and we're limited in the time that we're able to give the love we're meant to give before we leave. And also within this limited time, we need to make those reference cards to understand the workings of our heart. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I needed those couple months to really mull over what it is that I believe and how it is that I want to live going forward. And seeing my grandma like this really made me recognize the nature of life, the nature of time. It made me realize to stay where I am, look around, to love my best is part of really what it means to be alive. So here's the thing. And this whole thing also kind of made me look at my mom a little differently, because my mom and I were quite different, although we're also very similar. And you know how people can be very different in travel styles? It's like the difference between a J and a P in your MBTI type. J is a meticulous planner and P is a spontaneous explorer. And I think sometimes, especially when it comes to travel, my mom and I can be these two extremes. And this is how I've traveled for the longest time. I set foot in a new country, a new city, as if I'm staying there for another month, even if it's for a few days. I walk around, I get lost, pick one of many popular destinations, and I don't mind if I leave the rest for another time. I always tell myself, I'll come back if I want to, and I leave behind whatever destination I didn't get to. Whether I'm relaxed, laid back, enjoying my time is my top priority. My mom, as long as I can remember, she travels like she will never return to that place again. She usually is so happy to be at that vacation spot, the destination, and when she's there, she gets super energetic and wants to see every single corner. Every day she wants a jam-packed schedule to visit everything included in the tourist package, even if the rest of us are exhausted. And as you can imagine, very different from me, and I always thought we were too different in this way, and that I would never really fully understand where she's coming from. Like this past month, we went skiing, and my mom loves to ski. She probably hasn't skied in almost like 7 or 8 years, because other times I'd go off skiing with my friends, and my family, other than my mom, we really don't love it enough to plan our own ski trip. But we grew up skiing as a family, and one of the happiest I've ever seen my mom was when she was all bundled up in her ski outfit, coming down the slopes in full speed. So when we went this year, she was skiing with a sort of like ferocity. And she wanted to milk every hour we were there, every inch of the slope while she was there. And for the first time, I understood that time was, in fact, running out. Not just for her, but for all of us. For a long time, my mom wasn't 60. She wasn't considered old or weak. Just like I saw my life as boundless and unlimited, I saw her possibility of going skiing limitless. And so I kind of went with the flow. If there was a chance to ski for me, I did. If my family happened to decide on a ski trip, I went. Otherwise, I never carved out or created an environment and a time for my mom to be able to finally go ski. What I'm trying to say is 29 is the last year. It's the last year I'm waiting around for doors to open, things to happen, and waiting around to see my loved ones by chance. I'll invest in my capacity to give and receive love, which I knew from a long time ago that it'll be the biggest lesson I learned over my entire life. And practically, it'll have to be in the intention behind the way I spend my time, money, and my emotions even. And I'll have to do all of this with death in mind. Conscious of the fact that really I could lose this time or person at any time. And I guess, I don't know, I'm not really a huge resolutions person, but just moving forward as a 30-year-old adult, I think I'll start with the hardest part of my life, which is family. I think I spent so many years trying to find myself apart from my family, not knowing that this is where I should find myself in, really. And actually, while the time becoming independent was so good and important for me, going forward, I want to spend time, money, and sacrifice my pride to let my family know that I love them. I think this year I might want to set aside this part of me that kind of intensely desires, but at the same time is so scared to ask for the love I want from my family. And this fear of asking for love, I think it also hinders me so much from giving from my end. So instead of the struggle to ask for love or this desire to be fulfilled, I want to focus on giving instead and see what happens. I think it's time for me to receive that love from somewhere else other than my family or my childhood that's already gone. Actually, my Christian values say that this replenishment of love comes from God. And maybe going forward, I want to see this for myself, that this is true. And I will have to look for that source of love that really replenishes me so that I'm able to give again. So this is one thing that I will be probably searching for. Another aspect is to make room for memories, get my work done diligently, and plan trips to make those reference cards to store my memories in. I need to get out of the apartment more, change the backdrop of my life to mark important chapters, and to write more, create with intention, knowing the why behind every piece of content that I make. So that ski trip, that family trip I took this past month While I was spending time with my family, I began to write a small letter to myself. At first, it was a couple of words that kind of came to mind, but as the days went by, it became a sentence and eventually a small reminder that I didn't know that I had within me, but it came out into words and I wrote it down. And I think this letter to myself, I will be carrying it for a long time too. And I'll end this episode, the last episode of my 20s, with this small letter. Hey Maddie, many years ago there was a day you realized that at any given moment, anything we consider to be unquestionably permanent can simply disappear the next second. But for some reason, sometimes we are given second chances. And from then on, in the very ordinary moments, you started to see it. The million strings that hold the small moments together like a miracle. It may be fragile, but intricate, and it's beautiful. Will you try to remember? Every day is a gift and a miracle.